Welcome back, everyone. And thank you once again for joining us here at Unlocking Capital for Sustainability 2024. We are going to swiftly be moving on to our next plenary session for today on financing the tripling of RE capacity. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this panel, Salma B. Muhammad Maidin, Executive Director for Market Development from Securities Commission Malaysia. And joining Salma are our distinguished speakers, Karna Mohan, Vice President of Finance, Asia Pacific Siemens Energy, Tan Ai Chin, Managing Director, Senior Banker and Head of Investment Banking, OCBC Malaysia, and Tam Chi Un, Founder and CEO of the Trolic Energy Group. Salma, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I understand you've had a very good session, so I'm happy to follow in that track and have with me three very experienced individuals representing three very different aspects of the sector that I know will be part of the solutioning to answer the question before us, unlocking finance, financing the triple needs for renewable energy. So I think to tee up the session, I understand there will be a Slido a poll question, so that will come up in a little while. Yeah, there it is. So if I can trouble you to just respond to the question, it'll be good to just get a gauge of where you feel these measures are, and don't underestimate these things because we do pay attention to them to see what types of policy to push what type of measures. So what policy changes would you like to see, and you see the options up there. So as that's happening, maybe let's start with our session proper. I understand at the earlier session this morning when there was discussion about SDG, there was some assessment that we are unlikely to meet the SDG goals. So I want to start with the good news here. And one of the things that we have seen, S&P Global released a report, and they showed that the venture industry has substantial dry powder. I think on the venture side, apparently there's over $82 billion ready to be deployed for energy transition. Especially for climate tech, and the capital is heavily concentrated in growth equity and infrastructure funds. So this is a record high amount given what happened last year in terms of fundraising. On the PE side, it's a much larger number, almost 2.6 trillion. So when we do here, and in many of our discussions with bankers, with industry participants, we are told there's ample liquidity. So I think what is important for us to address is how do we bring all the parts together. Very clearly, the government has put the necessary building blocks in all their policy rollouts. We saw NETR, that was, I think, much anticipated, and the geeks that we are, at the SC, we were very excited to see NETR and the other policies that were rolled out, because it certainly gave us clarity in terms of targets and direction. I won't labor over the point about where Renewable will be part of that story. It'll be a huge chunk of where our reliance is. So I start the panel with maybe some stage setting and context, and this perhaps will go around all three speakers to address the same point. How you saw the announcements of NETR, and I mentioned funding is available. What do you see needs to happen? I mean, and your thoughts and your organization's plans of getting that to materialize. Maybe we can start with John.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Still morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tam. I am the founder and CEO of Trolic Energy. We are a renewable energy company. So I think this topic is very close to what I'm doing on a daily basis. So we are an active participant in the Malaysian renewable energy industry and also NETR as well. So I give a little bit of background about our company and myself for all of you who, just first time seeing us. Is basically we are a company that was founded in 2009 as a solar company. So we we went through the FIT period. We went through the, the evolution, revolution of renewable energy in Malaysia and the region. So fast forward 15 years today, we operate in 6 countries: Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, China, and Bangladesh. So we build solar farms, solar assets around the region. So we power, apart from solar farms that we own around the region, we power also our customers' building. Some of the notable buildings that we power up is, all the airports, electricity, green electricity on the rooftop is sold by us. So if you see airport, the rooftop actually belongs to our company. Universities, data centers, theme parks, water treatment plants in Manila, shopping malls in Philippines and in Singapore, data center in China, some factories. So we actually sell electricity to those companies. And we talk about capital today. Last year, our company also raised our first private funding from some DFI, right? It's managed by BlackRock. So we are actually backed by BlackRock as one of the energy transition company in this region as well. So we are happy to answer any questions today regarding PE, capital, and all sort of things. So NETR, my quick comment is, I think almost 1 year after the launch today, we see there is a lot of interest. First and foremost, a lot of people get everybody excited. So there is also, if you look carefully within the energy levers, you can see a lot of activities have been implemented. The third-party access, which is incoming, the net energy metering that is being expanded, the LSS program, the floating solar, the cross-border electricity. If you look at all the levers, actually they are already starting, right? So I think today, excitement is at its peak, right? But whether it is successful or not, I think it's too early to tell. I think the government is, apart from the net energy metering, which already is a success, it's just building on it and expanding it. I think key policies like third-party access and also cross-border energy sales is still very much work in progress, right? So it's still very early days to say whether it will be successful or not. So I think give it another end of this year, I think will be a good point to judge, to be a milestone to judge how far we have gone in terms of NETR. Yeah. Thank you.
That's a really good start. I think we'll get into a little bit more details on some of the things you mentioned when we discuss infrastructure. Actually, just same question to you, just from a macro perspective, general outlook.
Yeah, thanks for the privilege to be on this very important panel. Of course, besides just the financial, we have got, a real industry player who knows the pain point, right, of how it works and how to get there. And I think I agree with Tom that there are a lot of policies. I mean, we have got very great policies that have been put in place under the NETR framework. I think the minister is going to talk later. So in a way, I think the energy has been driven up. But I think the key challenges is really how to make it executable, right? We were just talking about LSS 5. I think Tam will be very busy tonight because there will be the tender process which they are putting up. I think that's the deadline today. So I think the good thing is they have opened up for more foreign participation. I think it's increased to 49%. That is a good, so I've seen there are a lot of parties that have actually engaged us as well, be it local and also foreign. I think the other key point beyond just solar is really what is next. What is the next in terms of the future of energy? I was actually at the in Sarawak for the first Asia Pacific Hydrogen Conference. And there are a lot of things that we are learning, in terms of what is the future of energy. I think Sarawak is definitely pioneering a lot of efforts in this area, be it in hydrogen, in CCS, carbon capture, storage, and all that. Also, interestingly, even in like algae manufacturing, algae production as well, to produce SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. So there are, and I think the other key area that people are looking at is really the bioenergy sector as well. So there are a lot of range of, solutions that people are looking at. Each one has its own different phase of development. So in a way, I think is, all this has to complement each other to support an energy transition, right? For OCBC, I think we have actually been actively participating in all this area. Obviously, I think in solar, we were one of the pioneers as well, from the FIT days to the LSS. In fact, I think just now the Dr. Ruth was talking about a project where you do good, right? I mean, the issue with solar plant is that they're using huge space, right? So actually, how do you then optimize the space for other utilities? So actually, we have funded one project, NETR, where they actually use the space to plant pineapple, and the proceeds is, all these benefits from it actually goes to the local community. So we actually, so this is something that is important that need to be done beyond just, the typical energy transition. I think the other area that we have actually pioneered as well is actually in biomass. We did a wood pellet manufacturing plant. We funded a wood pellet manufacturing plant. And this one actually, the sole purpose, the main purpose is really eventually going to be used to coal power plant. So these are the areas that we do look at. So I think given OCBC's pioneering effort and also track record in looking at all these things, definitely there are a lot more that we can actually do to support a just energy transition. Thank you.
Okay, kind of just from a global player's perspective.
Good morning. Still good morning. Pleasure to be here. I think we talked about the community. So it's a pleasure being part of this community and supporting Malaysia's energy transition. I promise you all that is still me in the picture. A few years have gone by. You talked about the National Energy Transition Roadmap, but there were other also important announcements like the London Climate Action Week, where Malaysia committed to reducing its coal fleet by half by 2035 and phase out coal fleet by 2044. I think these are very, very strong commitments from the government. And I think we were talking during the coffee break, one is the commitment, the second is, what are the actions that follow through. I think we see a spur in investment activity, whether you talk about the gigawatt projects, whether you talk about e-fuels, whether you talk about gas power. So I think it does help in having that investment spur in the economy. The way to approach it, of course, it cannot happen overnight. It's simply not possible. It has to be step by step. And we believe, when it goes step by step, there are 4 elements. Element number 1, you look at your existing infrastructure and you get the most out of your existing infrastructure, right? So you look at energy efficiency and how can you generate more efficiency with your existing infrastructure. IEA, which is the International Energy Agency, once called energy efficiency as a hidden fuel, right? So that's the value that you can get out of your existing infrastructure, and I think that is key because it requires significantly lower investment and much faster turnaround to give you more bang for the dollar. The second element is, of course, investing in renewables, right? And this, of course, takes longer period of time because this also depends on the availability of funding in the market. The third element is looking at the newer technologies, e.g. hydrogen of the world, right? And this is where an innovation comes into play, where you collaborate with different players in a country and look at pilot projects that you can demonstrate the viability and then scale up for the future. The last element, when you talk about renewable, it has to go hand in hand with the grid. You need a solid, reliable, and stable grid, because without a reliable grid, renewable investment will not work. So the grid needs to be able to handle the different energy mix and also the intermittency that comes with renewables. What is our contribution of Siemens Energy when it comes to this whole energy transition? We, of course, bring the technology, we bring the expertise, but more importantly, we also bring the learnings that we have with different projects across the world. We also then collaborate with the government, thought leaders, academia, and in forums like this, which I believe are essential to also bring forward the industry challenges. And last but not the least, I talked about innovation. We collaborate when it comes to innovation. So for example, in Malaysia, we have an MOU with TNB where we are collaborating with them to see how we can develop a hydrogen roadmap for them and enable Malaysia as a hydrogen economy.
Thanks very much for that. And I think that's very well put, a very structured way of looking at things. And one of the first things you mentioned is infrastructure. Maybe I want to then come to Chi An on infrastructure. I think we know that that's one of the challenges that we will face. And what are your thoughts about how do we scale up that readiness, including storage issue? And what more clarity do you want from regulators from a policy perspective?
Yeah. So when we talk about this infrastructure issue, in fact, the whole renewable energy issue, we can attribute to 3 factors, right? In general, high-level factors is technical issue, policy, and also capital, financial. So these are the 3 factors that always affect the topic that we have, tripling renewable energy, in my opinion. So I'm not going to bog you today with technical issues because this is a capital forum, right? We are in this building, so we should not talk too much about the technical side. But still, just to briefly touch on the technical part is, we are seeing currently today, even LSS5, there is a bottleneck in terms of grid connection in Malaysia. So gone are the days where you have a lot of lands everywhere. You can connect here and there to the grid, high voltage, 132 kV, 275 kV. So those are the days which I think are numbered, right? I mean, after this round of LSS, you won't see much more connection points that is left. So this is the real situation in Malaysia today. So the next step, logical step is to increase the grid connection or upgrade. So upgrade, how do you upgrade? Are you going to upgrade the substation? Are you going to build more transmission line? So that's one way. But the load remains the same, right? So you can't shift the KL load to say Kota Baru, right? So the load center remains the same. So how do you deliver power to the load center? So maybe answer is in building more transmission line. Or you can say how to through policy, you spread the plant in other places, right? For example, Johor, which traditionally is not a popular place, right? So how do you spread it over there? So there is a lot of way to optimize the grid in terms of, the first low-hanging fruit is to redistribute plants around the country through policy. Then second, once you have done that, that's the cheapest way lah. So once you have done that, then you have to invest in grid, which obviously costs a lot. So this grid, you need to not only the transmission line, you have to build energy storage, right? So that will even double or triple your conventional solar plant cost. So another way, actually putting energy storage can actually maximize the usage of a connection point. Because if you connect to one connection point, solar, for example, can only operate for 3-4 hours. So there's additional 20 hours of energy that you can deliver through the same connection point. So adding energy storage is a natural solution for maximizing the grid usage. So by putting storage, you actually defer the grid investment, right, to later time. So that can actually easily times 6, the capacity times 6 by using energy storage alone. So that is technical, right? To give a background. So policy, so whatever I said, the technical issue, the next question is, does the policy enable this kind of solution to be implemented, right? Because currently in Malaysia, as you know, we have a centralized utility kind of system. So how do we envision in future that the grid can be operated in a more open manner? There's a open access for all participants to the grid, and you can freely install battery in the grid to address the problem that I said just now, right? So how do you do that? So this is a policy challenge that we have to overcome. And the simple answer for me and generally in the industry is that renewable energy have to couple with an open electricity market, which it may not be last time, but with the proliferation of renewable energy, you need to have an open electricity market because it enables your roof, your house to actually inject power up to the grid. So this can only be facilitated through the open electricity market. Ultimately, I think all the policymaker knows that this is the ultimate goal, but how do we get there? So that's a second item. The third thing is capital. So how do we deploy capital into the first two criteria that I talk about? So that's also mobilizing capital. And currently, I won't say our capital structure in this renewable energy sector is at its most optimum, right? There's a lot of bottleneck, roadblock that Aichin can actually talk about. So I leave it to her. I won't take this from her, so I'll let her talk about this.
I want to sneak in a question on what you mentioned, and I think there's another very good tripod of segments that intersect where you then need solutioning, right? Technical, what is it? Technical policy and capital. You mentioned about major policy like should we have open architecture, open access? What and given that the legacy of where we've come from, the Malaysian policymakers, what would you want them to consider when they make that major decision?
I think policy. I think most of the policymaker knows what needs to be done. The ultimate goal is to have that, because in the renewable energy era is not like your conventional era where you have a big coal plant and then you inject somewhere that you don't see, you don't know where your coal plant is, and then suddenly you turn on your switch, you have power. So those days are gone. Those are centralized planning kind of utility. Today, your generator may be on your roof, on your head, over your head. So to enable this kind of relationship between the grid and your consumer, you need to have an open electricity market. I think everybody knows that. The policymaker knows that. I think what hinders this kind of policy is the capital structure and the commercial impact, even social impact. So when you talk about a lot of investment, billions and tens of billions, hundreds of billions into the grid, how would it affect the consumer? So who will pay for the adjustment in tariff, right? If TNB invests 90 billion, which they say they will invest by 2030, so this 90 billion will have to put somewhere. So it will be put under incentive, IBR, incentive-based regulation. ICPT adjustment-based tariff will be adjusted soon, next year, maybe end of this year. So how do they digest this cost, right? So number one question. Number two is how to also address the impact on the incumbent player, right? So there are companies, corporates, for example, IPP, coal-fired plant IPP, utility company. So in the era of shifting, the policy, how would the impact, negative and positive impact, affect the company? Because most of them are public listed companies. So how do you cushion the change, whether it's positive or negative? I think there need to be a shift in thinking in a lot of this thing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And that also sets up the question, Karna, maybe if I can turn to you to talk about costs. And I think Ji-an talked about, being fair across the chain. And how would we address that?
I think that's probably one of the most complex questions when it comes to energy transition. And I think Dr. Shapiro mentioned, people are looking at it from a cost perspective, then how do you transition it from a cost to an opportunity perspective? And I think there are lots of elements of the puzzle that need to fit together. It's about the regulation, the incentive, the subsidy on one side. It's about innovation and adopting innovative technologies on the other side. And it's about having a diversified funding on the third side that all needs to come together to make ultimately from a cost perspective, bringing down the cost and make the opportunity more viable. When it comes to the regulations on one side need to talk to the technology that's available today, but also the technological advancements that are foreseen for the future. The regulations should make the adoption of technology much faster. So for example, topics like permitting, etc., need to be much, much quicker. The faster is the technology adoption, the faster is the return, and therefore the investment case becomes even better and more viable. When it comes to incentives and subsidies, I think the majority of the audience here voted for carbon tax, right? There are lots of countries in the region that are moving towards carbon tax. And what that does, of course, is reduce the gap between fossil fuel production, which is much more cheaper on one side, versus a renewable energy source on the other side. There are countries like Japan and Korea that are going for something called a contract for difference, which again reduces the gap between fossil fuel production and renewable. The second element is innovation and adopting innovative technologies. So there needs to be an ecosystem that promotes innovation. And why is that important? I mentioned earlier, because with these pilot projects, you test the viability, and then once it's viable, then you can scale this up for rapid deployment across the country. I mentioned the project or the MOU we have with TNB. Another example is what we are doing with the NUS, which is the National University of Singapore, through a government grant where we are working on a low carbon energy research project, which basically is to test ammonia utilization. Then comes the last element, which ultimately is the key, which is the diversified funding. And I think in the previous panel, they talked about green financing ultimately becoming conventional financing. The timeline for that, I think, is too far in the horizon. I think that needs to be accelerated to make the whole energy transition viable. But this is also where companies play a key role. So for example, Siemens Energy today spends close to $1 billion annually on research and development. And what that does is ultimately bring technologies which are more advanced, more energy efficient, and help reduce the cost for the customers, which then ultimately make, like I said, the whole investment case viable. So these are the complex pieces of the puzzle that ultimately need to fit together to make the whole transition more sustainable for all the stakeholders.
Although if you peel the layers away, it doesn't seem so complex, right? It's carrots and sticks. Incentivize and make the case that if you don't transition, there is a price to pay for it. And I think I'll turn now to Aichin. You mentioned EDRA, and we're particularly happy to see that project because I think it was the first ASEAN Sustainability SRI Sukuk. And we're very happy anytime a issuance complies with the framework that we have developed, it shows that there is traction there. So beyond that, I mean, you've also worked with others. Perhaps you can share your thoughts on that experience. I mean, what would you have done differently? What would you want to do differently moving forward?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think in terms of, I think I mentioned just now about solar projects and all that, we have actually funded more than over 2 billion of financing in this field. And obviously, there are a lot of lessons learned. In fact, I think by virtue of our commitment to actually do a lot for this, the initial phase of renewable energy transition, we have actually been awarded, I think 4 years in a row, the National Energy Award in terms of sustainable renewable energy financing. But obviously, there's a lot of pain attached to that as well. And I think what more make it difficult was, I think during the earlier SSS, it was at the smack of COVID. So there were a number of projects that we have actually funded. We were in the midst of COVID, and there are a lot of lessons learned from there. I think maybe I will just, articulate some of the issues that we see. I think one of the issues is really, expect the unexpected. The problem is, I think, because of it being a tender process, obviously the pricing has to be very competitive. We have actually seen LSS falling down from the initial stage of 45 cents in terms of tariffs to 15 cents last round, right? And it's ridiculous, because to us, I think that makes it a little bit more difficult to make it really commercially viable or bankable to our view. But maybe the promoters has other ways to make it, feasible, okay? And another interesting note to see is that through the last round of bid, correct me, I'm wrong, Chian, I think the lowest 5 bids didn't actually win. So it was a good thing, right? That means you don't go by the lowest, you go by the capability, the credibility of the parties and all that. And I think during COVID, I think the issue is obviously with the disruptive, global supply chain. It resulted in a lot of delays, and so therefore costs go out of whack. Timeline go out of whack. So the question is, how do we manage this? I think, fortunately, most of this project financing were actually done via bank loans, not via the bond issue. Some via the bond issue, like for example, NETR, we did via the bond issue. That one was actually done post-completion. So you have less of problem. So obviously through all this bilateral relationship and discussion, the bankers, we can actually see how we can actually help to manage, in terms of the tenor, in terms of an extension and all those kind of things. I think the other peculiarity that we see in all this project is really because it is land matter. Land matter is actually state matter. So, the issue is always state authority approval. And I think those may not have been factored in enough in terms of, timeline to actually get the approval. So I think maybe one of the asks, if I could just add on, is that, on behalf of all the developers, is really, we should have a one-stop center to facilitate all this kind of approval process, right? I think it's challenging to navigate through, different timeline. It can vary, substantially. So these are the two issues that we see is happening, which we hope that through this process, all the market players and even the regulator can learn better to actually do a better job in terms of the LSS 5 going forward. Yeah, thanks.
Come to Karna to talk about, I think, from the financing point of view, and then perhaps get Chi An to also chime in on, you spoke about getting outside funding and from a PE fund. So perhaps from a project bankability and ROI perspective.
Sorry, could you elaborate on the question, please?
So just what are some of the thoughts, just taking off from what Chin was talking about? What are the practical issues? How do you navigate those issues?
Look, I think with any project, bankability is of course key, right? One is of course you have the sustainability targets, but you also have the commitment to your shareholders, and you need to find a balance between the two, right? When we look at projects, the ROI, of course, is looked at on a case-by-case basis, where we also juggle between our long-term profitability and commitment to our shareholders. But at the same time, as an energy technology company, Siemens Energy's own commitment to sustainability, which is key to what we believe as our values. So I think it's a balance between the two. But I would say one or the other cannot work in isolation of the other.
And certainly, again, as you say, one or the other cannot work, but commercial value it perhaps has tips over the decision, the fact that it has to be commercially viable.
It has to be commercially viable, right? It has to be commercially viable for all the stakeholders, because ultimately, if it's not commercially viable, people are not going to put the investment in. So it has to be commercially viable. If you have an opportunity to invest in two parts, right, which give you a similar ROI, for example, one which also meets your sustainability targets, one which does not, then obviously you will go for the one which meets your sustainability targets. And I think that's the juggling act that you need to do. But for all, like I said, for all stakeholders, I think delivering your commitments to your shareholders is equally important, if not slightly more important.
And maybe the same question to you. I mean, when you're speaking to investors, and perhaps Ajin, your thoughts after that on how do you encourage blended finance?
Yeah, I think projects, like what Aichin mentioned, the challenges in Malaysia is that Malaysian like to bid very aggressively, right? So you know, more aggressive than many places that I have seen and participated. You know, in Philippines, everybody bid according to the reference price. In Malaysia, everybody try to be lower. You know, so Philippines basically 100% of people they just submit one price. You know, Malaysian very aggressive for whatever reason, right? So which actually. I think sometimes we destroy value also. I think this is something that we need to be very rational about those kind of things. But it's not unique to Malaysia. There are also many markets where people have very aggressive assumption moving forward because solar, after all, is still a evolving technology. So solar panel price tends to drop and all this. So people sometimes they have an overly aggressive view on the forward pricing of those key equipments. That's why they bid aggressively. I think we cannot blame them to do that and couple with the external environment. Then some projects are at the edge of bankable and not bankable, you know, so it's the edge of bankability. It's at the very thin line, right? I think how we resolve that problem, in Malaysia especially, the problems are a bit compounded. If you think about it, low IRR is not a problem. It depends on the project belongs to who. So if today you are a very commercially driven entity, you take risk, you want high return, then maybe you want a 15% IRR, let's say, right? Or 20%, some people, right? But if you are on the other end of the spectrum, if you are an insurance company today, I don't know whether there's any insurance company sitting here. If you are a pension fund, you don't need 15%. You only need maybe 6-7%. So the beauty is in the eyes of the beholders, who owns the asset. So today, if I develop it at 10% IRR, the problem in Malaysia is we can't freely change hand. There's a very strict capital structure moratorium, which actually don't encourage de-risking of project and transfer of project. So this is, I think, one of the things that we can improve. Because if you look at project risk profile, once you hit COD, your risk profile basically decreased dramatically, almost near zero. So why shouldn't we be allowed to, let's say, sell the asset to a, say, pension fund after COD? They want you to hold it for LSS 5, they want you to hold it for 8 years. From 5 increase to 8 years. So actually, this actually compound the risk issue, right? Which I think the bank will also find it, you know, a bit better if there can be a freer, you know, a transfer of this kind of asset as well.
Maybe I just address that point first. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think I totally agree with Chian. I think the issue is obviously, you know, how do you go beyond just, you know, the current initial promoter? Frankly, all these are infrastructure assets with very determinable cash flow, right? So this kind of asset can easily be flocked up to the market. And I think if you talk about O&M, you know, contractors and all that, there are many of them that can do the job well. I mean, increasingly, solar has become very commoditized. right? Commoditized to the extent that there are a lot more players, in the market. Bankers know how to, assess the risk, and investors know how to appreciate the risk and can take the risk. So I think we should go away from all these very strict issues about, transfer of ownership, because by virtue of you doing this, I think unfortunately, there are always all the back end, way of going around these regulations, which then doesn't make it, very transparent, actually. Yeah, and maybe I think taking on the point, I think Sama you mentioned, and of course my two fellow panelists talk about, financing. Unfortunately, I'm always among the only banker among the industry players. I was in hydrogen conference earlier, also the same. So everyone's like, Aichin, so where's the financing? Okay, yeah. I think the key for financing, I mean, of course, like in the commoditized product, like, solar and, of course, those days, coal, and after that thermal, and after that solar. I think the good thing is the Malaysian market has got a very vibrant ecosystem comprising the bank market as well as the fixed income, the bond market. Must say this since Sama is here and we're in SC. So I think the good thing is that the Malaysian market has actually developed. I think this is actually the first, or rather, if I'm not mistaken, this is still one of the largest when it comes to project financing at, initial, that means at a greenfield stage. You can actually go to the bond market to raise funding, right? Not many markets, even the developed markets, has this kind of project financing ecosystem for bond market. So in a way, I think the investors, the developers can actually de-risk quite fast. Not just, you see, the problem with going to the loan market, sometimes we can't give you the 25 years, kind of funding. So invariably, then you ended up having a bridger, which will be then extended and all that. Whereas if you go to the bond market, immediately you can actually de-risk through that. So I think that's the good thing, yeah. But for the newer kind of development, like for example, we talk about hydrogen and all those sort of things and all that. These are really, something that's totally still new, to the market. In fact, I was talking that I think for bankers ourselves, we have to be Jill and Jack of all trade. We have to learn everything, but may not be able to master many of that. But I think we have to go out from a dinosaur war of learning all this new technology. Because if we ourselves are not learning, are not encapsulating the knowledge and all that, how do we then assess the risk? How do we then look at funding all this? So I think it's important for us to continue to embrace this new technology. And I think beyond just the conventional, senior lenders, I mean, bankers, investors, and all that, I think the key to spearhead the development of a new energy sector is really blended finance. I think we really need to, get the support from, whether it's, development banks, the World Bank, the IFCs, and the like, to see how they can actually support, all this kind of development. I think as Chian has mentioned, he has the privilege, to get the support, from BlackRock through all this kind of blended finance. So I think blended finance has to play a key role in actually spearheading the new world of technology in renewable sector. Thanks.
Can I wanted to ask whether you could chime in also on the...
No, absolutely. And this is, I believe, where, the regulations, incentives, subsidies come into play, which then promotes the adoption of this technology, from the private players, but also then makes for the bankers, the bankability of the projects significantly better as well.
Can I chime in on the blended finance part? So I'm to give a bit of perspective why blended finance is important, right? So for energy transition in Malaysia, IRENA have published figures, right? We need about 400 over billion US dollar from now until 2050 for Malaysia. So that's equivalent to about 2 trillion ringgit for energy transition. So while we are doing all these LSS and stuff, so sometimes you have to imagine the scale that we are doing things today, or like tomorrow we are going to submit something. 2,000 megawatt exercise is roughly only about 6 billion. So if you divide 2 trillion for the next 26 years, every year we need about probably 70, 80, I done some calculation. You can do your own maths, but it is a big number every year. So it's only 6 billion LSS5 tomorrow against the 80 billion average that we need to spend. So where does this money come from? Have we thought about it, right? I mean, the banks is willing to give debt. Debt is not an issue in Malaysia, I believe, but equity is a challenge. So for say, for example, 80 billion, you need 20% equity. You need 16 billion of equity every year for energy transition in Malaysia. So who has 16 billion ringgit in Malaysia every year? So that is a question about why there needs to be a blended finance, because the private sector cannot come up with 16 billion a year, right? I mean, TMB plus Petronas plus all the big cap company, I don't think they will invest, 16, 20 billion a year on energy transition alone, right? There still need to be other sector. That's why blended finance is something that we have to open up to. So what is blended finance? You have to bring the DFI of the world and then mobilize private capital, because private capital, sometimes they are very risk averse. They only look for the best investment. They don't do impact investment enough. So my company has a privilege that our fund are managed by BlackRock, but the investor in our company is actually a development bank of France, Germany, and also JPIC, Japan, and also a Grantham Trust. So basically, they are the first loss capital provider that mobilize private capital. So they lead the funding, and then private company follows them. So private company means insurance company, energy company, and private sector follows the DFI, which in turn they invest in my company to deploy the solution. So these are a very, how to say, investment that can move the needle, because that come from sovereign fund, come from the capital provider, global capital provider.
Thank you for putting up the question. I was about to ask that. We're about 10, 15 minutes away from the end.
Can I just...
Okay, go ahead.
Maybe I could just add to that. I think I do agree that the blended finance can come into play, from foreign, DFI and all the rest. But I think one very good pool of resources that we could actually tap on is really money flowing out of the ear from EPF, PMBs and all that. So those, GLIC, we call it government-linked investment companies, could also look at, how they can support this market through allocating some part of their resources towards financing all this impact investing, all this infrastructure development as well. That will come a long way, because otherwise, if you look at the investment opportunities in Malaysia, it's just the equity market, the bond market, right? So this could be another form of investment for them, the infrastructure assets, yeah.
Just one comment. Don't forget, Malaysia is also competing for the funds, right? So all countries are in different stages of energy transition. You talked about what Malaysia needs on a year basis. Globally, just to upgrade the grid to meet the renewable coming in, $3.1 trillion is needed by 2030. So there's a massive investment need across the globe, and everybody has to compete for that funding. So I think the funding will obviously be very, very crucial, not just for Malaysia, but also for the wider region.
You took the words out of my mouth. I wanted to say it's one of those unique positions we're in. It's a problem faced by almost everyone certainly around the region. Let's take one question from the participants. Maybe can I offer, Chi-An, could you take the question on microgrids for the future? And obviously, again, Ai-Chin, as you mentioned, being the only banker on the panel, and most often in many panels, the competitive rate and hydrogen, did it go missing? Yeah, the top question, Karna, could I ask you to take it on the hydrogen generated from, it's green, but the biodiversity loss? Or is that too political? Okay, anyway, let's get Chi-An and Ai-Chin to first take a attempt.
Yeah, microgrid of the future will be cheaper. I'm not sure whether it will be cheaper. Microgrid, when you have a captive grid, usually is more expensive, right? Because grid works in a way, electricity sector works in a way where you have economy of scale. So when you have scale, you share the same grid infrastructure, you share the same centralized power plant, it's actually cheaper. Microgrid, maybe you mean rooftop microgrid. So that's not, strictly speaking, that's still grid. Microgrid means it's captive. So today, if you read the news, there's a lot of like people build green industrial park. They try to be captive, right? So those are, what they're trying to do is microgrid. So usually the challenge is the costs.
So educate, is that a better solution, microgrid or
Microgrid is good to become green because you are self-contained, but it's not necessarily the cheapest electricity because you have to be self-sufficient. So you need to have battery, you need to have a lot of solar, you need to have biomass, whatever. So it's not necessary. But the good thing about Malaysia is, you know, I take the question a bit different, in a different way. We are government is slowly opening parts of the market to be able for competition like third-party access, which they say will come out in September, where you can actually sell direct from a solar plant to your factory without going through TNB. So this is something that will happen in a couple of weeks.
I guess that answers the second bit of the question. And Karna, maybe you take the alternative to...
Can I just add sorry, one comment as well. I mean, if you look at the grids, I think there is more and more drive also towards regional power sharing, right? You have the ASEAN power grid as an example. And I think that is also quite essential because then that also promotes investments in different countries, and also then, you know, one country shares with the other. And I think that would be defeated if we go with this approach. So I think it's also important to keep that context in mind.
I will try to attempt to answer the hydrogen question since I was at the hydrogen conference. I think obviously the key is, I think as pointed out, you know, how do we protect the earth, right? Because all these things that we're doing is really to protect the earth for the next generation. Currently, what the projects that has been undertaken in Sarawak, which are initiated together with partners from Japan as well as Korea, is really to tap into the current hydropower, current hydro, the solutions from the hydropower that Sarawak has already had, okay? But I think obviously that's not the only solution, right, to a renewable energy. I think Sarawak is also actively looking into nature-based solution, right? So the nature-based solution would be really to protect the Mother Earth, right? So in a way, there is a counter projects to, you know, all this that actually, you know, like, you know, you build more dams and, you know, you affect that biodiversity. But on the other aspect of it, there are, you know, investors that are looking into nature-based solution, protecting the world and using that as a, you know, to monetize the carbon credit coming out from this, you know, forest preservation and all those things. Yeah. I think obviously the typical question that is always asked is, are you going to give incentive and all that? In fact, I think probably Malaysia is, or at least this region, are the only market that actually gave incentive to clients, you know, to support the agenda of going, you know, green, going for ESG and all those things. So we do come up with structured solutions like, you know, sustainable finance, where we actually look at how do we structure, you know, your dream of okay, I need to actually achieve 2050, you know, net zero and all those things. What are the KPI to achieve that? And we go along with that, and if you do meet that, we give you incentive. But I think as Salma said, it has to be a carrot and stick approach, right? If you don't meet it, then there's be some disincentive. But to me, I think these are the little things that the financial institution could actually do to help support, you know, this agenda going forward. But over long term, I think it needs more than that, right? It can't be just a bank, financing and already very, competitive pricing for, the clients as well. I think the government is also coming up with a lot of programs to support particularly the SME in this field, yeah.
Yeah, Karna, maybe there are two questions on solar. What's next after? What's the alternative? Again, it feels like a wave. The wave is currently solar, at least in this region.
In Malaysia, yes, right, and that's purely because wind as a renewable does not work or is not possible in Malaysia. What's next after solar energy, or I would not say next, but also being looked at, I think you mentioned hydrogen, but that's really the exploration of different e-fuels, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's ammonia, etc., and how this balance can also then be brought into the energy mix.
I perhaps maybe just final two questions to all the panels. Ajin, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think the other part I think I may want to add on is really the bioenergy. I think Petronas has actually announced that I believe it has been announced that they are actually looking into, biorefinery to produce SAF as a HVO. So these are probably the other way forward as well, yeah.
So I suppose, and Karna touched a little bit on it just now, and when you spoke about ASEAN, I mean, huge demand for energy, huge financing needs, not an area particularly that there should be competition. So perhaps I can get all the panelists to share your thoughts on what do you want to see ASEAN do better together in this space?
I think for a regional power grid to work, not only does there need to be a harmonization of the regulations within the country, but also within the region, right? And I think that would ultimately be the key for a regional power grid to work. I mean, we are already seeing certain countries beginning to trade in the region on excess energy. And I think, once we move towards a regional grid, you will definitely see a spurt in investment in different countries. The countries that have more energy will, of course, clearly see more and more investments coming in. But I think key is that you harmonize these regulations across the region so that it becomes practical for different private players to participate in such grids.
I believe the government has come up with this energy exchange, right? I think the intention is obviously to have cross-border trade, of energy. And what I understand is 100 megawatt has been done, and Power Seraya came up, to auction for that. Clearly, I think that would be probably one of the potential solutions, in supporting each other in the region. But of course, the challenge that I think for Malaysia, if I could get to that point, is really, are we powering up enough versus the consumption of it? I think the other buzzword that is happening in the market besides, renewable energy is data center. We have proliferation of so many, data centers that's come out. Even as of yesterday, we were talking to about 4 potential, data centers coming out. And I think for those generative AI-enabled data center, it will use 10 times of the energy. So I think the challenge would be really the fact that, are we powering enough, to support the local consumption? How can we then support that to actually do a trading? I mean, to sell it to, let's say, Singapore and all that. I think these are the challenges that we have to face, what we call the energy trilemma, right? Against security for our own country, sustainability, as well as affordability. These are the 3 areas that I think we will grapple with over time.
Chian, final thoughts on, say, the region?
Yeah, I think I agree that the ASEAN power grid is important, right? But that's also quite a long-term project that may take 20, 30 years at best, at minimum to be realized. But ASEAN, even though is a community, but still very much different countries have different characteristics. Malaysia have its own challenges, which we have already explored today. If you look at key countries like Philippines, they have to build more grids, right? They have to reduce the price of their generation costs and everything. Vietnam, they have to build enough power plant to keep up with the demand. Indonesia, they are addicted to coal, so it's very difficult to do anything on energy transition in a big way. at this moment. I think the shining example of a policy in this region is probably Singapore, where, you know, we touch about carbon tax and things like that. So Singapore is a place where I operate in as well. So you can see there's a lot of the market policy, subsidies, carrot and stick drive the behavior. So Singapore, you have carbon tax, where they know that it's going to increase next year, 3 years after that, 5 years after that. The government sets a very clear, you know, pathway towards carbon tax and how much it impacts your electricity price. So the stick is put out there, and then there is a open electricity market. So basically, to take the Singapore example, you can actually use the policy, both carbon tax and also the open electricity market to drive behavior. So once you have these two, the market will find a solution to all these problems, I believe. Yeah.
If I may add, I think I totally agree with that. I think while there are a lot of talks, there is still no, real, legislation on that. But on the other hand, Sarawak has already imposed that already. So there is already a carbon levy in Sarawak. So I think we really need to change the behavior by having this. In fact, I think in Euro, they even set up a hydrogen bank where they actually use, obviously you they use the ETS to actually fund, subsidy to support, the agenda of developing hydrogen. So probably these are in areas that we should quickly look into. Yeah.
So I think that is being addressed. I do understand that NRES is, has its foot on the accelerator on the Climate Change Act. So we're hoping to see a lot more detail. So we're at the end of the session, and I think it really nicely wraps up the discussion, the intersection between technical capital and policy. So I think none can work on its own. The answer is always somewhere in between and requires a collaborative approach. I think I was at the same hydrogen conference and came out of that thinking science meets finance. Right, bankers are now experts on calculation of GHG emissions, and we are getting the science people to sit with us and talk about structuring, de-risking, leveraging, which party needs to be prepared for their investment horizon. So on that note, I hope you will join me in thanking a really good panel.